Welcome back to the shop for the conclusion of the Upscale Estes Ninja build. Now I want to get a preliminary weight and balance on this rocket so I know how much nose weight I can anticipate on adding to the nose. However, before I do that, I need to add the last little bits to the end of the rocket, and that would be the motor retainer and the aft centering ring. Now, just like with any assembly, you should always test fit the parts before you add glue and commit to putting the pieces together. When I did this with my motor retainer, I was actually surprised to find out that it does not fit very well on the tube. What's surprising about that is that I'm specifically using the Aeropack retainer that size for a lock motor mount tube. So, very interesting. I don't want it to be too tight of a fit because I want my my glue to wick in really well. So I'll take a Dremel drum sander and start working down the diameter of the motor mount here before I add the centering ring. Right, with just a little bit of work on the Dremel, I'm now able to take the motor retainer and slide it into position very easily. This will allow the JB weld to wick itself into the corrugated part of the retainer here, get lots of strength in the joint right there. So I just need to mix up some glue now. We'll get the centering ring and the motor retainer in place. Alright, well, I've had enough fun making our happy little glue joint here. The epoxy is just dripping all over the place, but we've got coverage on all sides of the inside of the body tube and the outside of the motor mount here. The nice thing is, with the way that the centering ring fits, I should be able to just kind of slide it into place. It'll push all that epoxy back, and then we'll set the rocket upright, and that'll allow the epoxy to pool properly to make a nice little fillet on the top part of the centering ring here. Now, I don't have little screws in to pull the centering ring back. If I need to put one in, I can do it real quick. However, the plan here is just to take my retainer and use that to push the centering ring into place. I'm in no danger of the retainer getting stuck right now because the epoxy takes such a long time to cure. So I'm going to set the whole rocket upright, and I'll mix up some JB weld, and we'll take the retainer back off, put the JB weld on, install the retainer, and then set the rocket upright again and let everything cure. There we go, with the retainer in place and real good coverage of the JB weld. I'm just going to wipe up the excess JB weld. We'll set the rocket upright and let everything cure. Well, I'm a month out from the Missile Mayhem launch at Tri-Cities Rocketeers at the end of May. As you can see, the rocket's not done yet. I had to go and get sick over the last week, spent most of the week in bed, unable to work on the project, so that put me a bit behind, so I'm kind of back in panic mode again. However, I am ready to continue with the build. I've got my AV bay installed into the payload tube, and I've marked the 6 positions that I'm going to drill holes in. 3 of those are going to be for the screws to hold the AV bay in place. The other 3 are going to be for the vent holes. Now, those are also the holes where I'm going to reach the screwdriver in to turn on the screw switches. So I've got the holes located about 2 inches from the top of the AV bay, 2 inches from the bottom of the payload tube. That gives me the most edge distance on both tubes. I've never really had a problem with edge distance. They all hold pretty well anyway, but that's just a nice location to drill the holes. It also keeps the screw switches pretty close to the top of the AV bay, makes them a little bit easier for me to position before I glue them in place. So as you can see, as before, I just used a piece of paper, wrapped it around the body tube, and then measured the circumference, divided that by 6, and that got me the position for the 6 holes that I'm going to drill. Now, it's important when you're drilling the holes that you know where the rail side is going to be, because that's a side that you want a vent hole and not a screw, so you don't have the screw rubbing on the rail when the rocket takes off. So we're going to pull off the paper here, and what I'm going to do is the first hole that I'm going to drill is going to be a screw hole. And after I drill it to final size, I'm going to put a screw in there, and that'll help lock the AV bay into position here. So I'm just going to start over here. I'll start with a pilot hole and work my way up to 11/64 of an inch. That'll be a nice size for the screws that I have. And then I'm going to go 1 size bigger to 3/16 of an inch for my vent holes, and that'll help my screwdriver fit in nice and easy to turn on the screw switches. There we go, and I can come back later and sand down the body tube, make it nice and smooth, but for now I'm just going to drop a screw into position. That'll help lock the AV bay in place, and I can get to the rest of the holes. As you can see, I've also got my T-nuts installed into some wooden blocks. Before I glue them in place, I'll be sure to round this side right here so it fits nice and snug inside the body tube. And I'll remove the AV bay and put the screws in place and use those to cinch the blocks into position. And while I have the drill out, I'm just going to extend the rail line up a ways and drill a pressure relief hole. It can be pretty much anywhere in the av bay tube here. You just don't want it to be where the nose cone shoulder is going to be or where the av bay is going to be. So that'll do just fine here. Little hole in the back of the body tube. There we go, and that'll help prevent pressure from building up inside where the parachute is, because you don't want the pressure inside to be more than the outside to the point where it pops the nose cone off while the rocket's traveling up. So I took my wood blocks and ran them through my sanders to give them a nice rounded shape to fit inside the tube here. I mixed up a small amount of epoxy. It doesn't take very much. I'm just going to spread the epoxy on the blocks here, and I'll put them in place and use the screws to hold the blocks in position. I don't want to use too much epoxy here because I don't want to get any epoxy into the threads. And after the epoxy cures, I can come back with either more epoxy or just some wood glue, and I can add fillets inside to make sure that the wood blocks don't go anywhere. One more check. This is my vent hole here. This is going to be my screw hole. Just position that. I'm just going to hold the block straight while I screw in the screw. Nice and tight. There you go. One block is in position, 2 more to go. With the av bay sitting aside for now as the epoxy cures, I can work on the payload tube and the nose cone fit. So just taking a quick look here, you can see that the nose cone actually fits pretty loose. There's a decent amount of play in it. Now there's a couple of ridges here to help with the fit, but even they aren't enough, and some masking tape is going to be needed. But what I'm going to do, in addition to the masking tape to help with the friction fit, since I am planning on using shear pins on the nose cone here, is I'm going to take up some of that clearance with some aluminum patches. So this is a 010 aluminum sheet, and I'm going to cut some small pieces, and I'm going to put them where my shear pins are going to go. That's going to help tighten up the connection between the nose cone and the body tube, and it's going to help shear the pins as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the location of the shear pins. I'm going to use 3 shear pins on this rocket because I'm anticipating using a decent amount of nose weight. Otherwise 2 should be sufficient. But 3 shear pins it is for this rocket. I'll mark where the shear pins are going to go on the nose cone, and I'm going to lay the aluminum pieces over that and JB weld them in place. So here's how I mark the tube. I decided that 1 7/8 of an inch down from the shoulder of the nose cone is going to work out great. It'll put the shear pins just ahead of the lower ridge, so that's where I'll be installing the metal plates. So 1 7/8 inch down from the body tube is right about there, and I just use my my piece of paper to mark the points. So I've got 1, 2, and 3, and you'll notice the third one is about 1/8 of an inch higher than the other 2, and this will help me twist the nose cone around and find the perfect position for it rather quickly. Because no matter how hard you try, the holes that you drill aren't going to be perfect. They're going to be a little bit off, and so there's only going to be one position that the nose cone sits in. So if you have one hole that's noticeably higher than the others, you'll be able to just twist the nose cone around until you find the screw that lines up with that particular hole, and then you're good to go on the other 2. And once again, don't forget, don't put the shear pin on the rail side. You don't want it rubbing on the rail. So there you go. I'm going to get some holes drilled. Alright, with my holes drilled, I went back with some thin CA, hardened the holes, drilled them again, and made them nice and smooth. So what I've done is I've placed the nose cone into position, and I've taped it in place so it doesn't rotate. And what I have here is I have a ultra fine point Sharpie. I'm simply just going to put the Sharpie through the holes and mark the nose cone on the inside. And that'll give me a location for the holes to be drilled on the nose cone itself. And more importantly, that'll show me where to put the metal plates. As you can see the marks just fine for the shear pin holes. So now I'll cut out the plate to make some nice squares, and I'll center them over these positions, and then I'll mark the center point on each of those metal squares so I can line them up with the holes that I've already drilled, and then we can drill into the nose cone and the metal. So the JB Weld's had some time to cure. I can undo all the masking tape here, and we'll see how the metal plates look and how it fits into the body tube. So here's how the metal plates look on the nose cone right now. Yeah, they got a little bit of JB Weld sticking out the edges, but that's okay. And here's the payload tube. We'll see how it goes. As you can see, it fits in real nice. Still has maybe a small amount of play at the top end up here, but we can add some masking tape on this upper ridge here just to help with stability of the nose cone. But with the plates in place and with the 3 shear pins in, this will be a nice solid connection. And here's the nose cone installed onto the payload tube with all 3 shear pins in place. As you can see, I used some tape to hold the nose cone in place while I was drilling and tapping the holes for the shear pins. The good news is the payload tube is pretty much done now. I'm just going to get it sanded nice and smooth. It'll be ready for paint. The other good news is now with the nose cone sitting on a little bit better, I can put the whole rocket together and do a weight and balance and see how much nose weight I'm going to need to put in the nose cone. To get an accurate weight and balance on the rocket, I need to do a full dress rehearsal and get all the components inside. So for the payload tube, I've got a 58-inch top flight parachute, as well as a chute protector and a nylon harness here. I have another harness on order from One Bad Hawk. Hopefully that'll be coming soon. I'll also be using a quick link up front, so I'm just going to take that too, and I'll put that all inside the payload tube, like so. I'll work that in there. There we go. Now I also have my avionics bay. It's not quite complete, but I do have the sled inside with the altimeters, both bulkheads. As you can see, I haven't done the wiring yet. I'm also missing the batteries and the switches, but those are pretty minor in weight. So I'm going to install the avionics bay into the payload tube, and then we can put the whole rocket together. So I added the drogue parachute and recovery harness, as well as a motor case and a K1103X motor. That's the worst case scenario for weight in the back of the rocket. Now, according to my simulation, the center of pressure on this rocket is 4 inches back from the leading edge of the fins. So that makes a nice, easy reference point for where I want my center of gravity to be, and that is the very front of the fins here. So I have to be honest, I got pretty nervous putting this whole thing together because the K1103X weighs quite a bit. I know the rocket's tail heavy. The simulation said I shouldn't need that much weight up front, but let's give it a lift and see where it balances. So actually, that is not that bad. Looks like I need to move the center of gravity about 3 inches forward or so. So I'm going to get my lead shot out, and I'll just put some into a cup, and we'll see how much I need to get it to balance. Here's my brand new bag of lead shot. I got 4 pounds worth off of Amazon, and I'm actually not anticipating having to use that much, so I'm actually very pleasantly surprised. It's going to help keep this rocket lightweight and should make it fly real nice. Alright, I found a little baggie and I put 5 ounces of weight in. Let's see where we're at here. That's good. Oh, that's not so good. So, looks like I need to put a little bit more in there to get the rocket to bounce a little bit further forward. So here's the rocket with another 6 ounces of lead weight up front. So that's a total of 11 ounces in the nose. So just picking up by the leading edge of the fins here. Looks like we are right about where I want to be. Yeah, that'll work pretty well. So 11 ounces it is, and also keep in mind this is actually the worst case that's going on right now. I have the weight of the cardboard tube for the motor, which is a little bit, but it is after the center of gravity. And in addition, there will be some weight added for the epoxy for the lead balls. The lead balls will be a little bit further forward in the nose cone, and I'll also have my tracker in the rocket when I fly it too. So all that's going to help. So this is the worst case. We're at 1 caliber of stability. I'm happy with that. Let's get the lead weight into the nose. Just a quick look at the prep work I've done on the nose cone before adding in the epoxy and the lead weight here. First of all, I've drilled 2 large holes in the base of the nose cone here. There's 2 reasons for that. One reason is we don't really want to use the eyelet on these nose cones. They're pretty heavy nose cones, especially with the lead weight in, and that's a lot of weight to trust on just a little bit of plastic. So instead, I cut 2 big holes. I'll just run the recovery harness right through the holes, back in, to make a little loop. That'll really give a lot of security when securing the nose cone. Secondly, I've drilled some holes and added some carbon rod at the tip of the nose cone. This is going to allow the epoxy inside to grip onto these bars going through, give a more mechanical hold on the plastic nose cone rather than just holding to the plastic itself. Now this technique works really, really well. My old Seawolf had something like 20 ounces of nose weight in it, and held great with the hard motors that I was putting in it, and even when the rocket had a motorcado, ended up crashing, dig the nose cone out of the ground, that epoxy was still perfectly in place even though the rest of the rocket was destroyed. So I'm just going to leave these sticking out a little ways. Once I put in the epoxy, that'll really lock these carbon rods in position. Right now I just have some CA holding them in place. After that's done, I can sand them smooth and then add the filler for the rest of the nose cone, getting it ready for paint. I'm almost at the home stretch for the Ninja build here. You can mostly tell by how messy my workbench is getting. There's a few things I need to do left here, mostly working on the avionics bay is the big thing. but I also want to get the booster section ready for paint here. And there's one technique that I want to share with you that I'm going to try on this build. Now, in some of my previous builds, I've used the rock epoxy for the fillets, and as hard as I've tried to smooth out the fillet, sometimes I get a small ridge where the fillet meets the body tube. And it's really difficult to sand the rock epoxy. You have to use really rough grit sandpaper, and then you have to smooth it out after that. So this time I've decided to use some wood filler just to fill in those tiny little crevices. So let's have a look and see how that's going. So after noticing some imperfections and some little bubbles and divots, whatnot in the fillets here with the epoxy, I grabbed some of my wood filler and I spread it along the fillet joints here, both sides of all the fins here. And I've done some sanding of the epoxy down on the front part of the fins, a little bit on the back here, but getting the ridges down on the fillets is pretty difficult with just sanding the epoxy. So with the wood filler, it's a little bit easy. I just wrap some sandpaper around a dowel, and it just takes a little bit of elbow grease. I can just kind of go up and down the fillets like that and smoothly feather them into both the body tube and the fins. And when I'm done, the result looks a little something like this. So you shouldn't see very much filler left. In fact, I should probably sand a little bit more here. But as you can see on this fin here, not a whole lot of filler. It's just there to smooth out the transitions. It really doesn't add anything to the strength, of course, but it shouldn't take anything away either. So a little bit more sanding, a little bit more elbow grease, and then all I have to do on the booster section before paint is I need to install the rail buttons and just a hole for the vent. And that's it for the booster. Speaking of the home stretch, while I've been working on other projects for this build, I've been getting a head start on painting some of the components, starting with the payload tube and the nose cone. That's when I ran into my first really big snag with this project, and if I can't get it fixed, it's going to be kind of the worst case for this build. Let's have a close-up look at both components and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The paint that I chose to use for this project was Duplicolor Perfect Match, mostly because it is an acrylic lacquer paint which dries quickly and doesn't have a recoat window that I have to worry about. With Rust-Oleum, there's a recoat time that you cannot recoat the paint, otherwise it'll ruin the paint. So I figured this would be a great example and a good time to use the Duplicolor. I had good results with it on both the Angry Daddy as well as my Drago build. So I started with the primer and went to paint, and as you can see, for the most part the paint looks really nice. However, in some sections it's a little bit hard to see here, but there were a couple areas that look like big fingerprint smudges or otherwise just dull areas that were not glossy. And no matter what I did to try and correct that through paint and through clear coat, I couldn't get rid of it. So I was very concerned about how this was going to look. I don't want my rocket looking bad like that. So in a moment of desperation, I decided to switch to my old standby paint, which is the Rust-Oleum. Now the nose cone was the second part that I had used the Duplicolor on. The first part that I used it on was the payload tube. And I had the same results on the payload tube. So I decided, alright, let's bite the bullet. I'm going to put some sandpaper on it. I'm going to get rid of all the Duplicolor and repaint with Rust-Oleum. And this was the results. And while Rust-Oleum isn't quite as good quality of a paint as the Duplicolor, it did end up with a nice glossy shine that's very consistent throughout. And I'll be able to buff this out just a little bit more, add some clear coat. Should be a really nice black paint for the rocket. As an additional bonus, the Rust-Oleum is quite a bit cheaper than the Duplicolor, which is $15 for a can like this. So quite expensive on the Duplicolor. Anyway, that's where I'm at with the paint. I'm going to go ahead and just use the Rust-Oleum for the rest of the build. Alright, the hole for the aft rail button is drilled. I'll drill that out to final size when I put the screw in and actually install the rail button, but that's a good location for now. Now for my upper rail button, I usually like to put the rail button a little bit ahead of where the target center of gravity is. Now, as we discussed earlier, the target center of gravity is going to be at the forward edge of the root of the fins here. Now, for the most part, I'm going to be flying lighter motors than the full 1706K, so chances are the center of gravity is actually going to be probably a little bit closer to up here. Now, I'd love to drill a hole up here for the rail button, but when I put my av bay in position here, which is right about there, I can see that all the gear for the av bay, my charge wells and connectors and whatnot, it actually extends out kind of a ways down. So, with that in mind, I'm just going to use this to sight, and I'll put the rail button right about there or so. That'll give enough clearance between the av bay bulkhead and the rail button. and still keep it in front of the forward center of gravity that I'm hoping for. Now with that said, one more hole to drill will be for the vent, and as long as you're forward of your forward centering ring, that'll be in the same chamber as your parachute and whatnot. So I'll just drill the hole here. And that's it for the booster tube. Alright, some final sanding to go. I've taken care of the fin fillets. I'm just going to get some 400 grit sandpaper out, do the whole body tube. I got to go to work tomorrow, so I'm going to be gone for a week, so it'll be nice to get a couple coats of primer in place, let that dry real nice while I'm at work, and then I can get to sanding it and start on the paint. Back from my trip, and I'm glad to see that the primer is cured properly on the booster section of the rocket here. I'm hoping to get some black paint on it later today, but right now it's raining, it's cold, and it's not good for paint, which is really unfortunate considering A, it's the middle of May, and B, I've got about 2 weeks before my rocket event. But I'm pretty sure we'll be able to get this done in time, just got to wait for a little bit better weather. I also have to go to the hardware store and actually get some black paint because I ran out before I thought I would. However, while we're waiting on the paint process to be able to continue forward, I thought it would be a good time to show you a little mail call here. I want to show you a couple items I got for the rocket. Alright, before I open up what's in the bags here, I want to talk a little bit about sourcing parts for your rocket projects. Now, most of what we are doing as far as hardware goes is pretty small, and typically you can get this size of hardware at the hobby store. However, if you do some careful sourcing, you can get a whole lot more for your money. In this case, for my av bays, I get my screws and spacers and T-nuts from McMaster Carr, as well as micro fasteners. You can get a whole lot more for your money here, and as you can see right here with the amount of stuff that I have, that's good for a number of projects to go. The worst thing that can happen to you when you're working on a project is to run out of these little tiny parts. It means you have to go make a run to the hardware store or the hobby shop, and it's just nice to have a good supply of them, especially when it's only like 10 bucks for this entire bag. Now, let's see what I got here. Okay. The first one here is, this is from Amazon. Now I want to talk to you about wiring for your av bay. Let's see here. I've been getting my wire from Apogee Components, and it's just a 22 gauge stranded wire, and they sell it for about $6. You get 5 feet worth of both the red and the black. And that's not a bad deal. It's easy to go into Apogee if you're buying other stuff anyway. They have it there. However, if you look around, you can get a little bit more for your money. In this case, I went to Amazon, got 10 feet of the same wire for the same price. So you get twice as much for your money if you're able to shop around there. Second of all, this is One Bad Hawk Recovery. These guys are excellent at making recovery harnesses. They also sell other items. And I want to show you what I got here from Teddy. Now, once again, I want to reiterate, I'm not sponsored by any of the companies I talk about here, but I do use them because I think they make a great product. Now, straight off the bat, One Bad Hawk gave me a pin here. Pretty awesome. And in this case, with the Ninja, after I placed my order, I emailed Teddy, and I said, hey Teddy, I'd like a red recovery harness because it'll match up real nice with the coloring on the Ninja. And Teddy got back to me, and he was able to make that happen. He also added a little bit of black in there for some color coordinating, and this looks pretty awesome. So we're going to do 25 feet for the drogue section, and the 20-foot section will be for the main. Well, the weather finally let up for one evening, and I was able to get the black paint on all the rest of the rocket. I had to put it together to see how it looks, and here it is. It's looking pretty good. It's definitely a Ninja, upscaled to 4 inches, all gloss black. It's going to look fantastic. I have some decals here from Sticker Shock, but I'm not going to put them on yet. I'm going to give some time for the all the paint to cure for the next week, because I'm going to be going on a work trip. I'll just leave the rocket, let it sit here for a while, let the paint get nice and cured. Then when I come back, I can do the altimeter charge testing, get the decals on the rocket, and it's ready to fly. So I was working on the vinyl decals on the Ninja here, and I didn't want to make this build video as much of a how-to as I have for previous builds such as the Drago. However, just doing these decals, I realized that I'm using a technique to make them all in an identical position on the fins, and I thought I'd just share that with you. Now, short of actually making a template out of paper, laying it on the fin so you can place the decal correctly, what I found is you can simply just take some data points here, make some measurements, and then just put those measurements onto the fins, and then you can set the decal exactly where it needs to go. Now this is important because it's tough to gauge exactly, which way to rotate the decal to make it line up perfectly with the rocket, and especially when you look at some of the details of the decal here, like these little dots, they're not exactly centered inside the diamonds. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to sight them correctly. So what we're going to do is I'm going to flip the rocket over here, and we'll make some marks, and we'll get a decal on just so you can see how this is done. So when I first placed the original decal and got some measurements on where it sits, I was actually pleasantly surprised to find that the numbers are very close to just being regular whole digits. Easy numbers to use, so I just used inches. Otherwise, millimeters also works great, whatever works for you. So these ended up being 5 inches from the bottom of the rocket and 2.5 inches centered up from the body tube. So we're not going to mark the paint itself. What we're just going to do is put some masking tape on it very lightly and make a couple marks on the masking tape. There's 5 inches from the bottom of the rocket. Here's going to be another one for 2.5 inches up from the bottom, or from the body tube rather. So just kind of get the tape in place where it's not going to bother the decals or be in the way. And I'm sure I'm blocking the video a little bit here doing that, so I apologize, but there you go. You've got 2 alignment marks. One is for the position up from the bottom of the tube, one is for the position away from the tube. Now here's the decal itself. I drew a couple lines on it so you can get a nice sight down the straight part of the diamonds there. As you can see, some of those dots, they're not exactly centered, so if you're trying to sight them by eye, the dots can interfere with your sight, create an illusion, and make it more difficult to line them up properly. Anyway, with the 2 marks located here, I'm just going to set the fin, or the, set the decal on the fin as close as I can with my lines in place. And I'm just going to put 1 piece of tape on the bottom corner there. And that's going to allow me to bring up a square. And I can sight down the square and rotate the decal left and right until I'm happy with how it looks rotationally. So I'm just going to very carefully sight that. That looks just right. So I'm going to hold that in place, take another piece of tape, put it on the top. That's going to hold the decal in place. Now, I'll grab another piece of tape here. Set that lengthwise. And now the decal is really locked in position, so we can pull it back. Remove the backing tape here. These decals are from Sticker Shock, by the way, stickershock23.com. Mark always does really great work on all my projects. Alright, let me just try and hold it up this way. And as I go down, this is a small decal, so I'm not using any liquid spray on the back. Just kind of push that into place. There we go, and we can remove all the tape. Be sure to go nice and easy when removing the tape. And there we are. We're getting close to the end of the Upscale Ninja build, and I couldn't be more excited. As you can see here, I've also been working on prepping charges for ground testing. Now every single project I do, I say, the next project I'm going to do ground testing before I end up painting the rocket. That never ever happens. This time is no exception. I've painted the rocket and I've put on the decals before doing the ground testing, but it gives us a great chance to have a look at the finished product. Well, here we are. It's the completed Upscale 4-inch diameter Estes Ninja, built with all lock parts, plastic nose cone, plywood fins, 54mm motor mount, sticker shock for the decals, 1 bad hawk for the recovery harness. And I've got 2 top flight parachutes on board. I'm using a 58-inch main, 18-inch for the drogue. I could not be more happy with this rocket. As you can tell, I was able to get that paint off, get the Rust-Oleum back on. Turned out really nice. So I put the rocket on the scale with everything on board minus a motor, and it came out to 7 pounds and 5 ounces. So I was actually really happy with that. I expected it to be just a little bit heavier. But with 7 pounds 5 ounces, this rocket should go real nice on I motors and up. So I'm hoping to fly it here this weekend coming up. Looking to fly it probably on a J420 or a J425 redline. That'll probably send it up in the 3,000 foot range. Just a perfect upscale rocket. With everything loaded into the rocket and the altimeters programmed, it's time to call this build complete. Now I do need to take the rocket out into the backyard and test the charges to see how much black powder I'm going to need for the main and the drogue, but I'm not going to bore you with those details. This was just mainly an overview of showing you the thought process and the design process behind upscaling one of my favorite rockets from when I was younger. Now, not only am I needing to get this rocket ground tested for this upcoming launch this weekend, but I have another one that I've completed as well. It's my Wildman 3-inch Punisher. It's going to be a very cool rocket as well. So I'm looking forward to getting these into the air over this next launch and over the course of the summer here. We'll start with some easy motors and see if we can work our way up from there. I just love doing upscale Estes rockets. I've got my Upscale Alpha and my Upscale Solar Warrior. This is my third one, and I think it's just going to be a lot of fun to go fly it. I hope you enjoy upscales too. Let me know in the comments below what project you've been working on this winter, and we'll see you next time.
Washington has a scratch-built Estes Ninja. It's going up on a J420 redline, parachute and dual deploy. This is the first flight. It has dual missile works, the main at 800 feet, and a T3 tracker. Range is clear. Skies are clear. Pad 25 is armed. Going up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I think it's up there.
We got eyes on it?
Event! Drogue!
We have the event.
Coming straight down, like right over there. We can just upload all the Google Drive. Yeah. Everybody hungry? Want your feedback?
And there's the main. Nice flight. Looks like that'll come down right on the field.
I don't think they're necessarily going in order.
Well, you see like the small right? Like it goes like straight down. Like it doesn't.
Okay, next up on pad 26, Greg Epo from Moses Lake has a scratch built